How's it all going with your podcast? I wasn't aware of you guys, obviously, until recently.
Yeah, from all the shit talking from me
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah. But do you know what? This is why I wanted to get on and talk to you in person, because I think it's really hard to have a conversation on Twitter. It's like really hard to.
It is.
You can't articulate yourself in the right way. You can't explain things. You've got a certain number of characters, and you usually want to like end up just arguing. So I thought, fuck it, because I saw your thing and I was listening to it and I was like, I just don't agree with it. And I was typing replies away like almost a little bit narcissistically, thinking this is bullshit. And I was like, what am I doing? Let's get on record. Why not?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I'm glad you had a good attitude about it, like coming in with the nickname Brock the Brock Destroyer.
Oh, that's just a joke.
Michael and I have like spent like hours and hours going back and forth on Twitter, just the two of us. Like nobody else in the universe cares, and we decide that we're going to use Twitter as a forum to argue. The most inefficient way to talk ever.
Yeah, it's
and
weird.
somehow
it's
we
ridiculous.
waste a lot of time. I'm
Do you
not
know
doing
what?
that anymore.
When I first did the podcast and I first went on Twitter, I spent too much time arguing with people. And you kind of, this weird thing, you kind of realize that you don't actually achieve anything. And well, it depends on who you are. But like over the last probably 6 to 8 months, I've basically been going around apologizing and trying to make friends with people I've pissed off.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's just not effective long term. Like, you know, in the end, you might need somebody's help, or you know, you want to ask them something. So sometimes it probably helps to not make enemies of everyone.
Yeah, actually,
and go ahead.
I was going to say, Peter, like one of the things I wanted to mention at the beginning is that us talking about you on our show was not in any way an attempt to provoke or we weren't trying to provoke anything really. Anybody who listens to our podcast would know that like that wouldn't make sense. We don't even really have any listeners, really. I mean, it's like, we're not trouble causers like that, but we do like. I think we're one of the things I'm very proud of with our podcast is we're allowed to say things because we don't have many listeners. We can kind of say whatever we want. Like when we had Jackson. Yeah. I mean, if you have a big audience, then you have to be a little more careful. You just do, right? Don't you?
Well,
maybe not.
I don't know. Like, see, that was one of the conversations I had with one of my advertisers recently. I said, I don't want to change who I am because you're now our advertiser. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a weird one. I tell you, it's kind of funny because, and I didn't take it as provoking, and it's absolutely fine. Good. Actually, a couple of things. Like, firstly, I thought it was surreal as fuck when I saw it come up that you'd had a podcast discussing mine. Like,
it's meta.
It's such it is, but it's such a weird experience because I just started this podcast like 14, 15 months ago with no expectations. And, you know, a year and a half later, I've been very fortunate to interview some amazing people and travel the world. Like, it's so fortunate, but I'm still sat in my like upstairs bedroom converted office in Bedford, like a shit small town in England, like doing this, like, and it's so surreal that like that somebody like you guys would really care. So that it's I can't ever get ahead of myself with it. And then secondly, you know, I'm out there interviewing people and challenging them, and you know, I've got to be able to take it back, right? So no, I embrace what you're doing, but I just think I wanted to talk about it with you, you know, because a bunch of people have challenged me on this Brock thing. Like, I think overall, most people have been supportive. Some people will be just because they like your show and they like you. But no, I thought it's actually a cool idea to talk about it.
Yeah, so with that, welcome to Keyword Crypto, everybody. This is Michael and the Bear. I'm Michael, that's JJ. And we have a special guest today, Peter McCormack from What Bitcoin Did. Do you go by, is it Peter McCormack or Peter McCormack? Is it like a hard act?
It's a hard act, but usually I just go by Peter.
Okay. So he asked to come on because if you listened last episode, we kind of went after him a little bit about his interview with Brock Pierce with his Mt. Gox series that Peter's doing about all the different people involved in the Mt. Gox scandal. And in the episode with Brock Pierce, he at the beginning he talked about, like, he prefaced it saying, I wasn't 100% happy with this. I wasn't sure if it was me. I wasn't sure if it was Brock. And at the end, he kind of went after Brock a little bit and said, but hey, I'm open to feedback. Let me know what you guys think. And that was the first time I ever felt, oh, hey, I did have an opinion on his style. And so I felt the need to reach out to him on Twitter. And we had a little back and forth, all friendly. But then he reached out to JJ, and I was like, yeah, great, bring him on, because I feel like this is a perfect opportunity to allow him to have an open platform to talk about criticism, and just because like we're all podcasters and we're all like borderline pseudo journalists, and what does that mean in this space? And I think this is a great opportunity for 3 people to talk about it at once. So,
Michael,
what exactly did you kind of want to get off your chest about our podcast, about our critique of you, I guess is what I'd love for you to start off with.
Hold up real quick. Can I just formally introduce the show and invite people to check out Peter's podcast, What Bitcoin Did, and follow us on Twitter, keyword crypto. And before you start, Peter, I think that Michael makes a good point about us talking about other journalists in the space. We have talked about other YouTubers and podcasts on the show, and I think that's one thing that's kind of missing in the space. We pride ourselves on being a more skeptical voice in crypto, even though we are cryptocurrency owners and we're big fans of it. We think it's a little bit missing in the echo chamber of crypto. So with that, tell us what's going on.
Well, I think there's a couple of things to unpack here. There's obviously the interview, and then also journalism itself. I think they're 2 separate points. I know they kind of merge, but what I would preface this with is that this all came together really, really quickly. So what happened is when I interviewed Jed McCaleb, there was no plan for a Mt. Gox series. I was out in San Francisco. Somebody made the introduction, and I was preparing for it, and I really don't have a care or an interest in Stellar. It just doesn't bother me. It's just not a project I really care about. But obviously Jed has a long history in Bitcoin, and if you go through my interviews, I've tried to get a lot of the old people in, as far back as going for Whitfield Diffie, one of the inventors of cryptography. So I just want to find things out about the history. So I went in to talk to Jed about Mt. Gox and Ripple and various other things. And this, we spoke about it, and recorded the episode. And then what had happened is I tried to get Mark Karpalais on about a year ago. And, we spoke on Reddit, and then it fell through, heard nothing. And then I messaged him again. I've been emailing him every month for a year. No reply. And then he replied and said, okay, let's do this. So I was like, okay, cool. I think I want to do this one in person. So with mine, I try to do as many as I can in person. I think in-person interviews are always a much higher quality because you get time with them before the interview to discuss what you're going to talk about and just get a bit of a feel for who they are. And then when you're sat opposite them, you have you can see a lot more about their kind of how they compose themselves. You can see their kind of body actions, their body language, and you can feed off that. So it's a much better interview. And then just the extra dynamic on the Mark interview was that it was also videoed. So it's hard to edit videos, so you have to be a lot more composed with your own questions. So anyway, so what happened was once Mark said yes, I did some research thinking, okay, I'm going to have Jen, I'm going to have Mark. Somebody said to me, I need to speak to Daniel Kelman. So I spoke to Daniel Kelman, and I realized, look, this is an opportunity to try and get everyone together and have an interview with every party and just put all the information out there. But from the point of Mark saying yes to it all coming together was less than 2 weeks. And that includes a 3-day trip to Japan. So you've got to imagine how much information I was trying to digest in that short period of time. And there's way too much for 2 weeks, right? It's just too much. You really wanted you'd want 2 months to plan for something like this.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so I just want to preface it with that, and just so people understand that this came around really quickly. And throw into that mix, by the way, I'm also a single dad. My son lives with me full time, so I'm doing homework and school runs and ironing school clothes and all that stuff as well. And I'm, in terms of the podcast, I don't have any staff. I engineer it. This week was the first time I've not engineered my show. I engineer it. I do the marketing. I do the publishing. So I'm basically trying to be a dad. I'm trying to keep the regular show going. I'm trying to land these interviews. I'm going out to Japan, and I'm trying to do all the research.
So
there is a
anybody at
lot.
this point who talks shit about Peter, a single dad raising a son, is a complete asshole. Now that's what you get if you talk shit about Peter.
And the other thing is so let me just stop here. If you're listening and you don't know what we're talking about, Peter did an amazing series on Mt. Gox, and if you don't know what Mt. Gox is, you should Google it. But it's kind of like the Alamo of crypto or something. It's this kind of legendary event, legendary thing that happened in crypto.
Brock said it really well. He said it's the stain on cryptocurrency that people always point back to about why cryptocurrency is bad. And I thought that was really enlightening of that he said that, because it's true. Like, people still use that as like, oh, you can't trust crypto because of that. How many billions of dollars were lost, whatever. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with a couple of the interviews, saying, well, back then, Peter, when people were talking about it, were like, hey, back then Bitcoin was worth how much? So nobody really cared until it actually hit 20,000.
Yeah, I mean, so I thought it was important just to get that in, because I think some people they underestimate how much work goes into a podcast, especially like if you're like mine. I'm trying to run it like a business. I don't do anything else, right? So I think that context here is important for how little time this got turned around in. And then the main issue, like, I welcome all feedback. The main issue I have is with the accusation that I sucker punched him with this information that was on the website. So what happened in a lot of my preparation, I spoke to as many people as I could. The general feeling about Brock Pierce was that he was interfering and delaying a process. The creditors have spent years trying to get their money back. Anything that gets in the way is just a pain for them. So the general feeling was that Brock was interfering with the process, delaying it, and a lot of his claims were perhaps lies or just kind of like smoke and mirrors for his own personal agenda, which wasn't clear. When I asked the question about their own CR plan, and he said it's not on, we're not doing that, I had no idea that was gonna be his answer. Up until the point he told me that, I fully thought they had their own CR plan that was going to be submitted. I think it was about the 23rd of April. I can't remember the exact date. So there was no sucker punch because I wasn't even aware.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, I feel like the interview kind of started like we didn't know. I mean, you didn't establish that you had talked to people and gotten the a sense of what people were feeling about it. I felt like that interview actually, even when it started, it was like it kind of put him on the defense right away, because you asked him, before you even asked him what he was trying to do, it was like, do you feel like you lost money? Do you feel like you have a claim? I think that was the thing that kind of got me. Really.
Well, see, I didn't. So really fast. Like, that didn't bother me so much, but for my thing is, you said it like, I didn't know that's what you thought. I didn't know that you were kind of speaking up that all these different creditors thought he was a bad guy, because that's what I meant about the sucker punch. Like, you threw that at him with. I took notes. I listened to it again just because I didn't want to like be that guy who talks shit and then doesn't follow up. And you're right. A couple of your points where you argued, I did misquote you. But like with 6 minutes left in the podcast, you kind of threw out, a lot of these people think you're a bad person. And you could see, I could like hear a pause from him being like, where the fuck is this coming from? Because that was my initial reaction. Like, whoa, like that. So for me, that's what I kind of meant by about the sucker punch. Because it was like, in my mind, like if it almost felt like you were being a voice for the people trying to get their money back versus an impartial person interviewing everybody.
But I'm not impartial. I've already said from the very start.
Exactly.
Firstly, I am not, and we're going to come on to this. I'm not a journalist, right? I'm not a trained journalist. I didn't go to journalism school. I used to work in advertising. I fell into this. And so I do have an opinion. And when I didn't do this series, and I don't do any interviews with a goal of kind of trying to find the most objective truth possible. I don't do that. I have opinions. And I also, for each interview, I have a kind of a goal in my head. But most of the time, I'm trying to get answers to the questions that that people want. So, when I interviewed Mark Karpeles, I said to him, who is at fault, who is to blame for the failure of Mt. Gox? That's a very pokey and very spiky question, which he either has to answer it's him or he has to blame somebody else. But what you'll notice is the difference between the interview with Mark and, say, Brock is how the guest responds. Like, I think I pretty much conduct every interview in a very similar way. I think I'm very kind of calm, and I try and listen and try and keep my cool. Brock was like on fire and like lively and firing stuff back at me. If you listen to Mark's very calm. So the way an interview turns out is always down to the two. It's like an algorithm of the conduct of the two people. If both people are calm, you can talk about the worst subjects, the most spiky, horrible subjects, and navigate through them. You can be with somebody as a hothead and discuss light subjects, and the whole thing goes off. So I think I'm pretty much the same through all my interviews.
But do you know a lot of actors? Like, are you friends with a lot of actors?
No, none at all.
Okay, so I mean, this dude this guy is the epitome of, and Brock, I'm sorry if you're listening, but narcissistic child actor. He could have the best intentions in the world, but he's really kind of just out there and just on stage at all moments of all times. Like, that's his persona. And so, like, for me, I wasn't, and maybe it's because I'm in West Hollywood and I do some acting and I'm just surrounded by that kind of person a lot. So for me, I didn't think he was that boisterous. I didn't think he was that like loud, and that's why I made the joke on Twitter. It's like, yeah, you're English. He's an American actor. Like, there's a big difference. And I'm watching the Mark interview, and the dude is a complete robot. Yeah. Zero expression at any moment in the entire interview. And I was like, so yeah, it's completely different between the three of you.
But you got to think, like, I'm going into this interview with opinions on people. So my interview with Mark, my opinion going into it with him was that I had a lot of sympathy for him, because I think almost anybody launching the first crypto exchange is going to run into problems. Now, there's a scale here, right? You're going to have from completely incompetent to very competent. And I would say Mark's probably more on the, out of my depth incompetent and just made some stupid mistakes. But we're still getting exchange hacks today. Mark's the kind of guy who is probably not a businessman and probably not a tech director. He's the kind of guy who's probably maybe a good programmer who needs a boss, who ended up taking over this thing that was doing thousands, maybe tens of thousands in revenue, to suddenly doing hundreds of millions. And he's completely out of his depth. And
Baker.
Yeah. And so I went into that with a certain amount of sympathy for him, thinking, well, I could just go in and ask all the spiky questions like some people want and really go for you and attack you. But I don't think that achieves anything. What I wanted to go is go with this kind of sympathetic angle and look at it slightly differently and look at it with a different set of eyes, because that for me was a more important way of conducting that interview. Yet when I go into the interview with Brock, I'm going with a guy where if you just Google him, there's a lot of history around him, a lot of different projects, a lot of things he's been involved in where there are questions. I mean, EOS is a fucking shit show. And there's a bunch of other stuff. So it's not like he's not like Jesse Powell, who's coming in silently in the background trying to do everything he can to help the creditors, taking no credit for it, just doing it silently in the background. He is out there, he's making a lot of noise, throwing out that he's altruistic, and when I've spoken to creditors, they say he's interfering, they say his plan doesn't make sense. So I've gone in with an opinion of Brock, and I've gone in, and I think my personal view is the way he reacted in the interview pretty much reflects what I think of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think what got me is that I didn't know what you thought of him at the beginning of the interview. It's interesting, you guys are talking about how different the interviews were between Brock and Mark. I kind of heard something similar, and that is, and even with Jed, is that all of these guys kind of very quickly go on the defensive. Mark, I think in the Mark, he started talking, like basically telling the entire story of Mt. Gox, like right after you had asked him like how his day was or something like that. It was like, how have you been doing the last couple years?
No, the question was more, I wanted to get a sense of what the 5 years had been like for him, because he's had death threats, he's been in jail. I can imagine he's had a lot of fucking stress to deal with, and I wanted to know what that's been like for him and how he's coped with it. And I did ask him that, and like you said, he told the story, and I was like, yeah, that wasn't really what I meant, Mark.
That's it's pretty. But even I felt like even Jed had a little bit of that too. Like when it started to get into like how much of this is your responsibility, it was like, oh, I don't want to touch that question or something. Maybe I was reading into that interview too.
But
why, there was some stuff he just refused to respond to. He's like, I'm not going to respond to that.
I mean, we are talking about crimes having been committed, whether you were committed them actively knowing you committed a crime, or you committed them passively, or you committed them kind of half aware. There are crimes that have been committed, you know, and if you've committed a crime, you potentially face a criminal proceedings or even lawsuits. So I fully stand by this thing of self-preservation. I think when anybody's in a very difficult situation, whether it's, if it's potential legal action, I think we all have a certain amount of self-preservation. Like, people judge these people, and I'm like, well, what would you do in that situation? You're facing potentially a decade in prison, longer. Are you just going to go on every podcast and say, yeah, I fucked up, I did this, I did that? Or are you going to say there's certain things you can't talk about, or are you going to tell a version of the events that protects you? I don't think any of us want to face a decade in prison.
I think that's a problem with the crypto community often being very impetuous and kind of like wanting to demonize people right away. And I think you're right. I think we need to actually remember that these are human beings and what would they do? I think that's really important. And what were you going to say, Michael?
I guess the one question I have for you, because you can say you're not a journalist, you can say you're biased and all that, but I feel like what you do is you provide information for people. And so I guess the question is there anything Brock could have said that would have actually swayed your opinion?
That's a good question.
Swayed my opinion about what?
About him, because in my mind, he's in no legal trouble right now. He hasn't done anything technically that's against the law. Nobody's looking at him saying you're a criminal. Nobody's saying, like, in no way is he implicated in anything. Jed could be. Mark definitely is. He just was somebody who said, hey, I'm invested in a lot of other things. Let me try to save this site. Here's $500,000 to try to get going on it. And he's in the situation where he's out $500,000 with some, short form agreement that kind of gets thrown out. And he's like, what the fuck? I am $500,000 out now, and I'm supposed to own this thing and I'm trying to turn this thing around and save it. And I get from his standpoint, and then you're like, and now you're the bad guy. And he was like, what the fuck? How am I the bad guy? So is there anything he could have actually said that would have made you think he is honest and you would trust your money with him, or you would think he isn't a bad guy?
No, I mean, I don't trust him in the slightest. As like, I mean,
so
I
no
think
way in that interview.
No. I mean,
interesting.
Maybe he could have, but I'm not there for him. I'm not there to become his friend or to have my opinion changed about him anyway. I'm there to get answers to important questions. That's not the goal of the interview for me to have a changed opinion of it. It's to get answers to specific questions. But I mean, personally, I think you don't have to spend very long on Google looking at the history of things he's been involved in and projects and various things to think this guy is of questionable character. And the people who tend to
answer?
The people who tend to shout most about being altruistic, and I do that. Like, it's like when I interviewed Roger. I've invested so much in so many companies, blah blah blah. They always have to preface what they're doing with, "I'm such a great person. Look what I've done." And I always find that a bit weird, because I think some of the, it's kind of just some bullshit virtue signaling. There's plenty of people in the background who do things without having to shout from the rooftop.
Well, I mean, he was calling himself an angel And the people that were going down to Puerto Rico were angels. And they're like, oh, I mean, angel investors. And he's like, and then he kept on saying angel a few times. I was like, oh my God, this guy, shut the fuck up.
What was like you said you wanted answers, but what kind of answer did you expect him to give? I mean, especially when you talk about self-preservation. What was that answer? I'm curious.
Well, I think so. The most important question I wanted an answer to, which he wouldn't give, was will he take legal action to claim ownership of Mt. Gox? Because he claims ownership to Mark and he claimed ownership to Jed. He said he bought both their shares. Now, if he makes... So one of the big problems that the creditors have at the moment is Peter Vasenis, who, by the way, I've tried plenty of times to get on and discuss, and he wouldn't. But his lawsuit from CoinLab is holding up civil rehabilitation. Everybody I have spoken to, and almost everybody thinks he should drop this claim. Now, quite interestingly, Andy Pag, my financier, had some very good opinions on this. But anyway... That aside, Peter Vasenis is holding things up. If Brock was to go and take legal action to claim ownership of Mt. Gox, that would be another thing that would hold up the process. And he has made various claims that he does. He says his lawyers think he has a very good case. He said that in my interview. Then he talks about these altruistic things. I think I wanted to know, is he going to be making a claim for ownership of Mt. Gox? He wouldn't answer it. But he wouldn't deny.
See, I didn't get that from you. I didn't get that that's what your thesis going into it, that you kept on trying to badger him about. I couldn't get that. And I think that's why it felt like you were personally attacking him or kind of like doing these gotcha things, because I couldn't figure out what question you were trying to have answered. I couldn't fully understand like your ultimate goal. And that's very clear right there, what you just said. But I didn't feel like that came across in the interview. And I think that's why I was so confused.
But that was quite early on in the interview where I asked him that. And then I asked him, look, so would you say today that you won't make any claim for Mt. Gox? And he said, no, I'm not going to make that. Yeah, which is fair enough. But I think, the ultimate goal is to understand what his motivations are. Like, what does he want from this? What does he want to get out of this? Now, he claimed all the way through the interview, I just want to buy the domain and I just want the brand. Then why do you have this website called Gox Rising, which has a whole campaign, which talks about a CR plan, which talks about various things that you're going to do for the creditors? They've spoken previously about creating an ICO to go after and try and recover funds. You know, there are all these grand plans that I didn't write them. I didn't create the Gox Rising website. I haven't put these grand plans out into the public. It is Gox Rising and Brock Pierce. At the point we interviewed, he was denying that they did want to do any of this. Now, that's not my fault. Like, if I'm researching an interview, I'm going to go and see what you've been publicly saying and your website, and then I question you on these things. So I'm not being the inconsistent person here. It's they're being inconsistent with what they're saying. And I tell you what I think's happened. There's been so much negative response from creditors. There's one of the WhatsApp groups was basically everyone saying to Brock to back off, this is not helpful, that I think the kind of weight of public opinion started to turn, and I think I got an interview in a week where he was backtracking. And
that makes sense.
One of the reasons I think he was losing his rag and starting to kind of get kind of frustrated during the interview is that, like, telling the truth is really easy because there's only one version of events, right? It's only one version when you tell the truth. Okay, when you lie or backtrack or change your story, it becomes very difficult because you've said something in one place and then you say something somewhere else. And I think one of the problems he was having is he couldn't give a consistent story because the things he was saying just did not reflect what were on the Gox Rising website, what he'd been saying in the WhatsApp groups.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'll give you that because he definitely did not know what was on his website when you asked him about that, and I think that was I don't know. I feel like I'm listening to a guy who's got maybe $1 billion invested in all these different exchanges and all these different Bitcoin projects and all these different cryptocurrency projects, and I'm thinking to myself, how much of that stuff is he actually doing himself? Do you think he actually went and built that website himself and he put all that stuff on the website? So to me, the chances of one of his assistants putting it together and blah, blah, and then he's like, doesn't realize that this is up on that page, and he's like, "Oh shit!" And then so I kind of gave him a pass on that, but I can see how that would look pretty damning, especially when when it's specifically contradicting what he's told you up until that point.
Well, listen. Okay, did you hear earlier in the interview where he, it's pretty patronizing, saying to me, "Well, have you read this? Have you read it top to bottom? It doesn't sound like you read things." Okay, so
I do that to JJ all the time, and it pisses him off.
Because it pisses me off so much.
No one can be all knowing about everything. We all make mistakes. We all forget things. But he went for me on that point, right? Way early in the interview. So when we get later on in the interview and he exposes himself and not knowing what's on his own website, I think it's fair game for me to say, okay, right, let's fucking have it then. Okay, if you're gonna give me shit, I'm gonna tell you. You're now actually just a hypocrite. So I don't know. I think the weight of public opinion is usually important in these situations, and I've taken flack in the past for some of my interviews. But if you just go down and read all the comments about this interview, I mean, I would say it's 95% plus one feeling about it, and
then 5%. You have keyword crypto, just dropping nothing but shit on Twitter.
Well, there's a few people, like there's been a couple of comments on my website, and blah blah blah. Look, I don't know Brock. I've met him once. It was weird. I'm not. I
can't imagine it not being weird.
I don't feel like I have to, for any reason, like I don't have to give him any like credit. I don't feel I need to have to respect him. He's a guy I've interviewed. I think by everything I've researched and learned about him, he's probably a piece of shit. And yeah, I mean, I have an opinion on him, but so be it. Like, I would not have interviewed Brock Pierce if it wasn't for this.
Interesting.
If it wasn't for, I think he's involved in a lot of shady stuff, and quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have any interest in him.
Well, that was actually one of our very first podcasts, was crypto frontmen, and does crypto really need them? Because it was at the time of like Roger Ver, just at the height of the Bitcoin forks and all that, and it was when Brock went up and did that interview and TED Talk or whatever, and then he was on the John Oliver show, so everybody who watches John Oliver was like, and he's just talking so much shit about Brock Pierce, and it's just like, do we need these front men? And are they actually helping, or are they making it worse?
And then we also, I mean, as like our podcast, I know that like we actually, you say that you wouldn't have interviewed Brock, but I feel like our podcast, we actually kind of want the crypto pieces of shit on here, because when somebody's full of BS, they're almost kind of fun to interview, in my opinion.
Well, but they all interview in the same way. Look, I've interviewed Craig Wright, I've interviewed Roger Ver, I've interviewed Morgan Rockwell. Like, I've had people who are questionable, and they all interview the same. They're very similar in the way they interview.
How is that? How do they interview?
They're very much like politicians, and they try and pull you apart. It's very difficult to interview these people. Like, when I interviewed Roger Ver, I spent 3 days prepping for that in Tokyo, and most of the time I spent researching how people interview politicians, and I watched people interview politicians just to try and see how to do it. But I mean, do you know the John Oliver connection
with you and him? No.
Yeah, like it's it's a loose connection. He's from the same little town in England as me. He's from Bedford.
Oh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. You know what's funny that you said about the politician thing is when I listened to the interview again today, and I was thinking to myself, you almost kind of sounded like a person who debates for a living when you were like kind of cornering him with stuff. And like using debate techniques
in an old school way,
against
in a very
him.
old school way.
Yeah,
the new sort of debate is a little bit more insults thrown, but yeah.
I don't know. I find it's funny. I actually find interviewing very, very difficult and stressful sometimes. Like, really difficult.
It's very hard.
Yeah, it is. And I have a very mild like speech impediment, like the mildest that probably wouldn't even be like diagnosed.
Never would have noticed.
Well, no, sometimes I really struggle. Like, I think it's part nerves, but I struggle to find a word. Like the moment ago, I just struggled with the word diagnosed, and I'm like, fuck, where is it? Where's that word? So
I think we're all like that, though.
Yeah, I take like 10-second pauses sometimes. I'm like, the word will come to me. It'll come, and then I'll it.
I'll say I'll write and say entire sentences that I don't even remember. So that's my speech impediment.
But because of that, like my interviews, every single one, I've got I plan a full structure. I use this tool called Agenda. Like, let me just bring one up. So, for example,
I might need this.
So my Andreas interview, right? So what I do is I have an intro section, and I've got literally, it says there, "Hello, Andreas, how are you?" And then it says after that. So after a year of trying, we finally brought together, blah blah blah. And then what I have is sections. So I've got a section on Bitcoin, I've got a section on Ethereum, and then I index sections based on subcategories. So like if it jumps around, I've got my questions kind of prepared, because I've done a couple without any kind of cues, and I just find it really stressful and hard. So the structure of my interview with Brock was mainly based around what I prepared. There was no, it wasn't like I was trying to wind him up or I was trying to provoke him. It was, these are all the questions that I want to ask you based on my research that I think are important. Like I had in there, in my list of questions, should you be trusted?
Ooh.
You know,
No, I mean, you definitely, it was obvious you had to reel him in, because look, and like I said, I feel bad for the guy if he actually did invest $500,000 or $500,000 in the first couple days trying to put out that fire, and then all of a sudden have Mark turn around and say, I'm not going to honor that short form contract. And because I'm sure also Brock, he's not going in there he's got $1 million lawyers who are doing all this stuff for him. So
$25 million lawyers.
Yeah, so I mean, so the fact that still happened, even with all the lawyers that I'm sure he's paying, because as a child actor, he's been dealing with lawyers since he was 6 years old, 10 years old, whenever he started acting. Because
not generalize him as a child actor anymore.
Why? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, like, who knows what he's been through? But let's judge him as somebody who's doing what he's doing now.
No, I'm just saying, as a child actor, you're dealing with a lot of money, so you're dealing with lawyers, you're dealing with agents. So this is just ingrained from a very young age. Where somebody
we're
like
not here to psychoanalyze him.
Well, no, hold on. I'm saying, whereas me, who got into acting later and started dealing with that, So I'm saying so from a young age till now, he's been dealing with high-end lawyers. And so the fact that still happened with somebody who's been dealing with lawyers their whole life and still had that kind of fiasco happen and losing $500,000 is just, I thought that was kind of odd. And he didn't throw anybody under the bus.
Yeah. You don't believe that?
I don't believe he spent $500,000. I think that's one of those things you just put out there to try and justify what you're doing. I mean, I might be completely wrong, and he might be able to prove it. And
that would have been a good question. Did you actually spend $500,000?
No, I said to him, do you have a receipts for all this? And he said, yes, of course. But I don't believe he spent $500,000.
Yeah, that was funny.
Do
you have receipts? Can I see your receipts?
Your receipts for the purchase of Mt. Gox?
I mean, you got to admit, you were like jabbing him left and right, and he was jabbing you back. I felt like I was watching a boxing match a little bit. And you two were like, whenever you could get a sucker punch in, you were both taking the opportunity to do it.
That just goes to show, though, that, like, I mean, you say, Peter, that, like, you struggled with doing an interview, a year ago? And, like, now you sound to us like somebody who's ready to box in an interview. That's pretty impressive. I mean, awesome.
Very few of my interviews degenerate into some kind of argument or some kind of, like, heated debate. And I think there were two key turning points in the interview. I think the first one was when he said to me, well, you should read this. Doesn't sound like you read anything. I mean, that's a very spiky, provocative accusation halfway through an interview to the interviewee. I was like, okay, right. Well, if you want to play it like that, that's fine. And then I think the other very key turning point was when he asked me if I trusted Mark Karpeles with my money. I said, I don't trust either of you. And I think he took that as quite a personal insult. But, I still think I maintained my cool through most of it, despite him being quite tempestuous, quite spiky, quite angry, quite rude on occasion. So yeah, no, look, if I throw a couple of things at him, it's more like a look, fuck you. I'm doing this interview. I think that the interview and the interviewee are of equal importance to make it a high quality interview. And yeah, if I threw some stuff out there, I think possibly he deserved it.
Possibly.
Well, now he's going to interview me.
I'm looking forward to that.
I think that the interview overall was good in the context of all the other interviews, because the Mt. Gox series really for me was like a bunch of puzzle pieces that put together this picture of kind of what happened. And now I can kind of see it and be like, oh my God, what a fucked up thing. And to think back then, no one had any idea what it was going to be worth, and nobody had any idea. Just like such a mind fuck, really.
Do you know what I think? I think every person in it came out reflecting exactly who they are. I think you can read about things and try and get a picture of people.
Except Brock. Yeah.
No. I think every single person exposed themselves for including me. Like I exposed myself as a slightly amateur podcaster on the edge of journalism who doesn't really know exactly what he's doing and is kind of finding his way.
No, you didn't do that.
I think I did. I think
that's fair, because you've said that you're biased and you're not trying to be a journalist. So I
think that you exposed yourself as somebody who's done an amazing job over the year and a half that you've been doing this. You already sort of like are an inspirational figure to a lot of people. Your show is
so weird.
Your show is incredibly like, you're totally transparent. You put all your metrics on Twitter, and you like even your revenues and stuff. Like that's like that. People need that these days.
Yeah, I tell you what, the only problem with that is like if you start to make really good money, I think you run the risk of people turning around and go, well, fuck that guy. But yeah, I mean, if it helps people to get out and do something else, I think I'm more than happy to share it. But yeah, I think every person exposed themselves for who they are. I think Jed McCaleb came across as somebody who has stuff to hide. I think Mark Harpellis came across as somebody who majorly fucked up and was out of his depth. I thought Daniel Kelman came across as a very solid voice of the creditors. I thought Kim Nielsen came across as a guy who, probably not had. You didn't need a strong opinion of him, but came across as somebody who did a lot of research into understanding what was going on and can be trusted in terms of data. I think Brock Pierce came across as a piece of shit, and I think Andy Pagg came across as Andy Pagg, who's just like a very sound reasoning, like a very good sounding board for kind of concluding everything that had happened, like a very good voice of reason. And I came across as, like I say, a bit of an amateur podcaster who has an opinion. And by the way, this you said about having a bias. I mean, you're in the US. When I go over to the US, right, I love to put on the local radio when I hire cars. So if I'm going from LA to San Fran, I won't fly. I'll hire a car and I enjoy that 6-hour drive, and I listen to the different local radio stations as I go through towns. There is no impartial radio. It's either it's either conservative or it's liberal, and the same with your news networks. So I don't know, like when people turn around to me and say, "Oh, if you're going to be a journalist, you need to be impartial." I'm like, where the fuck's impartial media? Where is it? Tell me.
Well, we did an episode on that about it's something that was rescinded in the 80s called the Fairness Doctrine, where in America, if you said anything about another person in this country, within 7 days you had to give them a platform on your show to defend themselves and to rebut your comment. And that was rescinded by conservatives in this country, and Fox News came out the next year. And that's when conservative radio came out, where you can just say whatever you want about people now and be as biased as you want, and there is no recourse for the person to defend themselves, which I think is a stain on our country. So that's kind of why I was really excited to have you on, because I feel like I talked so much, shit about not having the Fairness Doctrine anymore. I wanted to make sure to live up to that statement and say, no, I do want people, if I say something and somebody has a gripe with it, I want them to be able to come on and defend themselves, or just have a conversation if they want to. We're small, most people don't care, but like I appreciated the opportunity to have the discussion with you about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is cool. And like anyone who disagrees with what I say, I'm happy to. I mean, every single podcast says, look, if you want to talk about it, drop me an email. I spend a lot of time on email talking about my shows to people. I'm more than willing to go on a show and discuss an interview. I'm more than willing to have somebody come on and defend themselves if they feel a need. Like Brock wants to have a second interview, no problem.
Really?
But I'm not going to pretend I don't have an opinion, and I'm not going to share it because I do. I do have an opinion on certain things, and I want to get that out there.
So Peter, we're gonna have to wrap this up soon, but I wanted to ask one last question. You said everybody seemed to expose themselves, for better or for worse, in these interviews, and yourself included. But what would you say you learned about yourself and having a podcast, through those interviews specifically? I mean, I'm assuming these interviews were, I don't know, were they difficult in comparison with your other interviews? And there must have been a different type of challenge, but yeah, what did you learn? What was new?
Okay, great question. A couple of things. I think I realized that the podcast has become quite a serious business, right? Like the reason I run my thing transparently and have those income reports is this podcast is a business. I have 2 children to provide for and a retirement to plan for. It's not a hobby. It's my only income stream. It's a business. So I run it like a business. So I think what I learned through doing this Mt. Gox thing is like, this is quite a serious thing that I'm doing. I didn't understand the full weight of it until after I kind of I was halfway through, like towards the end of it, and I had people messaging me, like emailing me and saying like, you've done a great job here. And or creditors saying, wow, you've released information here that's really important. So, and I think I learned therefore that I should do more of this. Like I'm going to do a similar one about the Silk Road at some point, and I'm going to do a series about Lightning. So I learned kind of like this is a serious business, like a serious like media thing, which is kind of cool. What did I learn about myself? So another one of your questions, like, was it hard? Yes, this one was extremely hard because you're trying to get to certain truths where you're carrying a lot less information than other people. Like if Brock really went for it, he could wrap me up and expose my lack of knowledge about certain things. He could really.
Well, you didn't read it. You didn't read it.
I did fucking read it. That's the thing, though. Like you read like this. I had so many notes on this, but you can't digest 5 years of information in 2 weeks and know the answer to every question of what is on every single report. Plus, I'm doing daily interviews, right? So I'm moving from one to the other. The Brock one came in a day early because I was flying out to Japan, because I made the decision to fly out to Japan. When I was out in Japan, I also had my son with me because I have no choice for him to come. And I can't just leave my son in a hotel room for the weekend, so I'm having to say, okay, look, I'm going to do this interview, but then we'll go shopping, right? So I'm juggling a lot here. You drop the odd ball. You drop the odd ball. What did I learn? What did I learn about? I learned I really fucking love doing this. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I really enjoy it. It's really good fun. And I learned that people like what I do, which is cool.
Well, so I guess that's awesome. What would be your advice or tips for other people kind of wanting to do this sort of thing or start their own projects, in crypto, want to start their own businesses, start their own podcasts, start their own YouTube channels? What would you say?
Start. You can... So I was chatting to somebody on Twitter about this earlier, actually, this morning. And I said, they're saying you've done really well, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this is 25 months of work. And I think they didn't realize that a year prior to starting the podcast, about 9 months, I was writing, blogging about crypto. Now, I've deleted most of those articles. They're nonsense. But when you start writing, you start to think about things a little bit more deeply. So I think if you're going to do something, just get out there and do it. You can start today. You can open up Medium, or you can start a website with Squarespace, and you can start writing and creating content. If you specifically want to do a business, say if you want to do a podcast, you just got to get on and do it. You've got to book your first interview, prepare for it, record it, edit it, and get it out there. You've just got to ship something. If you specifically, like people have said, oh, you've done really, really well with your podcast, and it's like, it's always a tough thing to answer because you want to go, yeah, I've done really fucking well, but at the same time, you don't want to come across as arrogant. So what I would say to people is, if you want to do a podcast, you got to focus on it's about, I don't know, it's maybe 5 things. You've got to try and do very good sound. You've got to get very good guests. You've got to record a quality product, and then I think the thing people most underestimate is the importance of the brand. And maybe that's because of my background in marketing, but I've focused on building this very, very strong brand. Those banners I put out, the pink and black banners.
Yeah.
With they stand out right now. Every time you see one, you're like, that's who's coming, and that's a brand that people remember.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing. And then lastly, you just have to really fucking work hard. I work 70 hours a week on this. I was up at 6:30 this morning working. I'm going to be working so I've got a day with my son, and then tonight I'll be working before I leave. Tomorrow I get on a flight to New York. I'll be working in the airport before I leave. I'll be working most of the flight. When I get to my hotel in New York, I'll be working because I've got a show coming out on Tuesday. It's relentless. But it's now getting to the point where it's coming good. I've literally just done the figures. So I put out the preliminary figures yesterday, but the podcast did $29,000 this month. Hold on.
Wow.
It's pretty impressive.
Give me 1 second, sorry.
So that's
$29,284.65, right? And that is made up of so that is made up of give me 1 second.
It's a lot of work, though. I mean, there's a misconception that being an entrepreneur in 2019 is you work 5 hours a week and the rest is just passive income.
But so out of that 29,000, 5,300 goes to the network I'm part of as network fees because they get a commission on my ads. Out of that, I got $1,250 from Patreon, which is pretty cool. I got hold on, this is really interesting. So just in terms of tips, tips across Lightning, and I got $1,332 in tips. People just sending me money, Bitcoin or Zcash, etc.
That's crazy.
One dude sent me 0.25 Bitcoin. He just sent me a message, said, look, I've listened to every episode. I've never done anything. I'm going to send you some Bitcoin just so you know it's coming from me. It came through as 0.25 Bitcoin. It's fucking insane. So, but the point where I'm trying to get to is there's $23,000 after my network fees. Now, my costs for the month have been quite high because of going to Japan, etc. But what I'm now able to do, my last interview came out was engineered by a professional engineer. I do it myself normally, and now I've just been able to agree a deal with him to do the next month. Here's a fee. He's going to do every episode. That now that's going to save me about 30, 40 hours a month. So once you work really hard, but then once the hard work starts to pay off, it kind of, life will get a bit easier. So now I've got 2 people who work with me. One guy does the transcriptions, one guy does the engineering, and that is saving me, I don't know, in total across the both, probably 50, 60 hours a month.
See, I just have JJ for all that. That's the good thing of having a sound guy.
And then I just message you, Peter, and ask you what you do, and that's our engineering.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, man. That was amazing.
This is really great.
So who's in West Hollywood?
Me, Michael, and then JJ's.
I'm on the east side of LA, so we're both in Southern California.
So put it in your diary. 15th of March, I think it's Friday the 15th of March. I land in LA, and I'll be in LA for 4 days. So let's go and have a beer.
Perfect. It's a day.
Yeah, totally. What are you going to be in LA for? Is it going to be for interviews or?
I've got I'm interviewing Mark Weinstein, the guy one of the partners for the Fire Festival.
Oh wow, that'll be interesting.
Whoa, nice.
So, yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crypto analogs to the Fire Festival, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, he's involved in crypto anyway.
It's too close to home.
And I don't really want to talk to him about crypto. I'm just going to like, tell me your Bitcoin story. Right, fuck it. Let's talk about fire. But no, I've got a flight to New York on Sunday. I'm doing I've got this mad 3 weeks. So it's New York, Chicago, Boston. Then I'm going to Hong Kong because I'm emceeing the Token 2049 event. Then I'm going to LA. Then I've got Denver, Austin, maybe Nashville, New York, and home. So it's going to be crazy.
Wow, your national tour.
Yeah, but I love LA.
When's the book coming out?
no one would buy that. But I really love LA. So any chance to have a few days there.
That book.
Yeah, we'll definitely have
cool.
a beer. It's exciting that you're getting out there. It's exciting to see that all your hard work is paying off and that it's possible. Even because JJ was always kind of giving me a little bit of grief that like the future's YouTube, the future's short form, and I was like, no, there's still possibilities for long form, and that's what I'm more passionate about. And it's nice to see that it's still possible.
Do you see the Gimlet deal with Spotify?
No.
So Gimlet's like a podcast network. Spotify bought them for like $300 million.
Holy crap!
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I know Spotify's doing the podcast now. I didn't realize that's probably...
There was Gimlet, yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of the two. But do you put your podcast out on YouTube as well?
Not yet. Well, we have a YouTube channel, and we actually just started like doing an animated thing, but we haven't actually gotten it off the ground yet because we haven't figured out how exactly to make it yet. Because we can't. It's too difficult to edit the long form that we're doing. So I just stick my
podcast out on YouTube as they are. Like
that's what we're gonna start doing pretty soon.
What visuals do you use?
I use a tool called Repurpose. It takes the show visual, but it does this annoying little wavy thing over the top. But again, I've just done my stats. But give me 1 second. I'll tell you for.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're Keyword Crypto. Follow us at Keyword Crypto on Twitter, and then also, of course, check out Peter's podcast, What Bitcoin Did. I know it's funny. It's funny when we have to do these station identifications, but
21,000. Sorry, it's 21,900 views of my podcast on YouTube this month. So that's
dude. Yeah, JJ,
15%.
Yeah,
we need to do that.
right.
I tell you why.
Yeah, totally.
YouTube,
I agree.
YouTube's just a massive search engine.
Yeah. I think we should have different content on there too. Totally, all kinds of content. Like what you said, just to get out there and start making content.
Yeah. Well, is there anything? Any final words you want to throw out there for everybody, Peter?
No, just thank you for having me on and letting me discuss this. I'll obviously be interested to see what people think. And good luck with everything you do. If I can ever help you in any way, just give me a shout. You know where I am. You've got my email, and just DM me, and more than willing to help support your show. And yeah, good luck with it, guys. It's I think I really like listening to your show. I really did enjoy, whilst finding it very weird, listening to the way you two. I think you two have a really good rapport. It's a cool show.
Well, thanks. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks for a beer. Or no,
a
couple of weeks. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. That was Keyword Crypto. He's Peter McCormack. Follow us on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter. And we'll see you next time.
In the sky when we kiss, putting on